they lost during the first Trump administration with these tariff wars. So I think these broad indiscriminate and on again, off again.
I mean, we'll talk to him in a few minutes, but I mean, he seemed to be saying that he favored these, broad tariffs on
Hello everyone, this is FIDE Victor Newstroif, and thank you for joining our workshop today. It's called Weakening Enemy Pawn Structure. What we are going to talk about? We are going to talk about how to provoke weaknesses in the enemy camp and then take advantage of them. Please let me know if the sound and video quality is good. Also, those of you who are unmuted, make sure that there is no background noise. Thanks, Arush. It's great that you can join these classes. Okay, so it's up to you. You can keep your camera open or close, but people mainly see my camera and my screen. Yeah, so if you, it's better if you mute yourself, but if once you want to say anything, once you want to have once you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and tell me what exactly you do not understand or what you want me to clarify. Fine, so let's wait for more people to join. So today, America changed time to the summertime. That's why we had to start 1 hour earlier compared to Europeans and the rest of the world. Here, even in Argentina, where I lived, we started 1 hour earlier. So usually our workshop starts at 1 p.m. Today, it started at 12. Is there anybody who attends this webinar or this workshop for the first time? If yes, can you please introduce yourself a little? For example, which country are you from and what's your rating? What's your ELO on chess.com, or if you have a FIDE or USCF or any national ELO? Yeah, you can type it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and say that. So we are about to start, but people are still joining. Fine. Okay, so this workshop is a recording, and on Monday, I'm going to send you the recording of this event. So if you miss something, I'm going to send it so you can watch it again on YouTube. It's also streaming on YouTube right away. So some of our members can be from YouTube. So that's why if there is a question, but you don't see it, it's probably because that question was asked on YouTube. Fine. So, yeah, so Jason. Okay, Elite League on chess.com, and I feel that got game. Okay, perfect. May I know where did you find the information regarding this workshop? Is it on chess.com? Was it on chess.com? Yeah, fine, perfect. Okay, so also please, by the end of the event or once you decide to leave the event, please share your feedback, how you think this workshop, whether it was helpful for you or not. Fine, so what we are going to talk about, let's start. We are going to talk about the pawn structure, because some chess players even say that pawns are the soul of chess. What do they mean? It means that the pawn structure decides the strategy of the game, decides of what you should be doing in the game. That's why actually I've created a course which is called Planning Guide, where I explain how you should operate once you see this or that pawn structure. Well, I'm sure you already know about this course. That's why let's continue with our main topic. So let's first realize what a strong pawn structure allows you to have. Well, a strong pawn structure with no weaknesses defends the king, guarantees a lack of tactical threats by your opponent, as well as allows you to initiate a strategic attack or increase some pressure on the enemy position. That's why it does make sense to weaken the enemy pawn structure, because you can, for example, if there is a pawn structure over the enemy king weakened, you can attack that king, create threats at least. You can also initiate some tactical strike, like combination, like forks, like what else? Pins. You can occupy squares that are weakened in the enemy territory because of not ideal pawn structure. What else? So you can also initiate pawn breakthroughs and create a pass pawn. For example, if some pawns are doubled and you have a pawn majority on one side, you can create a pass pawn there. There are a lot of ways of how to weaken the enemy pawn structure. So what are some of them? For example, you can attack the enemy pieces or enemy king and provoke one of the pawn movements. This is what we are going to talk about. I'm going to show you a few examples. You can also attack enemy pawns and provoke them to move and make them weaker. You can initiate a kind of a tactical strike on the pawn structure, like you can sacrifice, exchange double pawns, and then capture these pawns. Or you can, for example, sacrifice a pawn, double the enemy pawns, take one of them back, but make other weak. Sometimes you can also advance just the h pawn, which actually is a good strategy when there is enemy pawn on g6. Okay, let's stop talking. Let's start with the analysis of our first game. What do you think white should do in this position? Yes, it looks like this pawn structure isn't ideal, but well, at least they cover the d5 square. Well, unfortunately for them, they cannot play d5 because this is how they blunder the pawn on c5. Oh, well, actually, at the moment, they blunder the pawn on d5 too. C takes, knight takes. But can we create more weaknesses in the enemy camp? So Brian suggests b4. Brian, can you please explain? Because in my opinion, b4 makes your pawn structure weaker. So b4, b takes, c takes b4, then what? Queen takes. Yeah, well, d6 is a weakness, but okay, let's say they play something like that, threatening with d5 in future. Or maybe they can bother your queen first. So not sure if b4 is the best move. Moreover, they cannot, well, actually, I think they have to take, because if c4, you can take on e5 and take on c4. So they will definitely take. And what I don't like is that these pawns are isolated. c4. Well, doing c4 is a good move, generally speaking, but it doesn't make the enemy pawn structure weak. Yes, you stop d5, but you already stopped d5 with your pieces, so you don't really need it. Well, there was a good point by Peter, yes. Well, uh, chess coaches usually tell kids that doubling pawns is something really terrible. And when you double the pawns, you ruin your pawn structure. It's so significant. Well, it is important when the pawns are isolated, but when there is a pawn connected, a lot of things have to be taken into account to decide whether doubling pawns like that is a weakness, or instead it's not such a weakness and can be compensated with other pieces activities. For example, well, doubling the pawns usually open a file and allows the rook to attack through that file. That's very good when, for example, the king is exposed and the rook can attack through the g file. Okay, there is also a suggestion by Brian to play knight f5. Well, so you want to weaken this pawn at the cost of a knight? No, it's not worth a knight. Double the rooks on the d file by John. John, and what then? f4 and d5, maybe. Yeah, f4 is a good move, but knight g4, f4, backing up the knight, less special advantage. So f4 forces black to lose some space, but they will play this move 100%. So maybe you can play something like that and queen c7, but I doubt it works because of bishop d4, and now d6 is not under attack. And then, for example, queen c8. Well, maybe there is a better move, but let me just try queen c8. And, well, what this queen does? Almost nothing. If the queens are exchanged, black is fine here. So that's why your idea of f4 looks good, but let's keep it in mind and suggest something else first. But f4 is definitely a helpful tool. So bishop h4 was played in the game. What? Why they play such a move? They play such a move because actually now black is provoked to make a weakness in their camp. How? Well, if they play a rook move there, they just blunder on d6. If they play rook there, then they blunder f4 because now the knight is trapped. g4 is no longer available. So the queen was totally blocked and the knight is fully trapped. Well, I'm not sure if they lose the knight because maybe they can play g5 and then just sacrifice a pawn, but it's still not attractive for black at all. White will get a huge advantage. So f6, I think actually it was the best move. However, then f4. And, well, actually, let's do queen here and f4 later, because with such a queen move, I'm also attacking f6 indirectly, because queen c3, and I'm going to play f4, exchange the knights on g4, and take on f6. I think it does make a lot of sense. Well, I'm sure black can defend the position, but at least we created some problems. In the game, it was g5, and g5 is the most natural move. So when someone attacks you, it does make sense to defend your position and also win a tempo. And g5 is this exact move that allows you to win a tempo. So bishop retreats. There is no tactics. No tactical strike, no sacrifice, but the bishop retreats. Let's now decide what changed to the position. Nothing, just the pawn moved. But that pawn move was crucial because now f5 square is weak and it allows our knight to jump there and nobody can bother that knight. So that's why with bishop h4 we achieved already some advantage, and let's try to exploit it. Well, queen goes to e6, knight goes there, and they play a defensive move. First of all, they keep their bishop alive. Second, this bishop is able to defend two weaknesses. Queen c3. Well, extra pressure here, some counterplay there. That's why they play f6 to support the position. Well, let's decide what we can do here. So, yes, the pawn structure is weakened. We have our knight, which is better placed, but what do we have to do in order to play for win? Aha, so good point by Dan. And Brian. So h4, and Brian says not sure about h4. Okay, yeah, actually opening the position makes a lot of sense. However, let's decide what is better, h4 and f4. Usually h4 is better because in case of f4, you create more pawn islands and isolate your e pawn. But this time, doing f4 seems to be better, because if they decide to take, the h6 is a weakness, and it also allows you to get the queen to the other side and put more pressure, as well as create a tactical strike with this discovered attack. Of course, they don't take on f4. Here they continue with knight g6. Now f4 is hanging, but for this move, well, it was better to play knight f7, of course. Then we would play queen f3, and step by step would move our queen to the enemy camp and would try to take advantage of the weaknesses. But they play knight g6, and now I want you to find a tactical strike which allows you to get a significant positional advantage and then convert it by means of a tactical strike. Okay, maybe e5 and maybe knight h6. So e5 blunders a knight, so not at the moment. And I don't even think it works. Knight d6 with f5. So knight d6 or knight h6. So let's decide which pawn is weaker, h6 or d6. So in my opinion, it's d6. And that's why capturing h6 is better. Bishop takes and then f5. And you still keep attack on that d6 pawn. How do they play? Well, they have to move the queen, and if they move the queen there, then f takes g6 is an attack. And after they take it, we can capture on d6. That's why here, well, after we capture on d6, we win the pawn. And also these two are a bit problematic, and white should win the game. So queen e7 instead, not f7, not to fall under a tempo, but instead this, f takes g6. So this is not hanging at the moment, but can be. So for example, in case of, let's say, king g7, I think we can just continue with this move. This move helps to indirectly protect the pawn, as well as adds pressure here. And d5 is not playable because of this discovered attack. So that's why king g7 looks premature, and because of that, black plays this prophylaxis, bishop f8, in order to then play king g7, but have enough attacks or have enough defense on d6. So what do you think we should do in this position? So here I want you to exploit the whites, to convert the whites' positional advantage by means of a tactical strike. So what your suggestions are? Queen f3, queen h5. Yeah, looks quite attractive. Not sure if it works, because queen f3, well, I'm covering this square, so maybe queen f3, I can play something like, I don't know, rook d7. So queen h5, let's say, you are not threatening with anything, so let's say queen e6. Maybe I can play e5 and rook a7 to cover the 7th rank, so it's not a clear win. Okay, so Jason suggests c3, king to c3. What does it mean, king to c3? Rook f1 at the end, but again, not sure how rook f1 works. C4. Queen to c4. This is what you mean. Yes, it's queen to c4. Right. How does queen to c4 works? Well, definitely the king moves. Well, to g7. Well, it can move to h8. It can move to h8 too, but, well, then you can activate your rook. So the king moved to g7 in the game. Bishop f2, rook a3, rook h3 makes sense too, but is a bit slow.
What did you think
Fine.
about what did you think about
Uh-huh.
the queen to f3 to h5 plan? It's a few people
But
mentioned.
I think we've covered it. So queen h5, okay, queen e6, then what? Rook f1. Well, okay, well, rook g7. Something like not this. Well, queen e4 is actually kind of a threat. I see that f6 is hanging, but I may consider a sacrifice. Because I don't really see what queen h5 achieves. If only black covers the 7th rank, there is nothing you can do. I mean, there is no checkmate. That's why I prefer this, because after king g7, there is a win. Just one move and you win the game. So probably this is what Jason had in mind. So what do you think? How should we continue here? With the h-pawn? Well, there is a better pawn up. Yeah, it's too slow. But yeah, it's still a favorable position. But the key idea of this check was to get your queen to f7. And this makes the enemy queen overloaded. It has to defend 2 squares. That's why simply, well, there are suggestions of bishop d6 and rook d6. Well, bishop d6 seems to be better because this is a tempo move. Yeah, I would say either distraction or overloading. So, well, if rook takes, and you're down exchange. I mean, black is down exchange. And if queen takes, it's a checkmate. Same thing with the king on h8. What if they don't take? What if they play something else? For example, queen b7. We are 2 pawns up, but we are likely to lose one. However, again, not everything is clear because maybe taking on g6 is too risky. What do you think white should play in this position? No, remember, their bishop is now hanging. Yeah, you can take on c5, and I'm sure this position is winning after that. You can take on c5 with a queen. It does make sense too. And if king g6, even queen f... Well, yes. So, for example, if king g6, you can take there. They take, then you play queen f5 and bring the rook to d7. So how do they play? If only they move the king to the 7th rank, it's game over. So probably this, but it still seems to be a game over because of rook h7 then. Yeah, queen c5 looks good. I think they are likely to do this, take, queen takes, and then king g6. But I think it's still fine. So e5, rook f8, and what's then? Maybe e6. Wait, what am I doing? The rook on f8 is just hanging. So yeah, it works. I think the best way is actually to start with e5 to keep this bishop alive. Because if f takes is e5, this is just a disaster. The king can hardly find a safe place. If king g6, let's say, then we have plenty of moves. So what is better? Take? Just rook f1 is better, yeah. H4. Yeah, well, H4 seems to be, it's still okay, it's still winning, but Rook F1 creates a deadly threat of Rook F6 and how to defend. Not with the queen, not F5 because of Queen E6, so Bishop G7, but Bishop G7 fails. Why? Well, at least because of that. Then what? So I'm debating between these two moves. Well, let it be this. King has to go to G7. But if so, I think I can just take, and then continue with this, and then I have tons of discovered attacks. So if, for example, king goes here or there, it's queen h7, taking that queen. If the king goes there, then I can win material by just bishop c7. So I take the rook for free and continue the attack. Okay, let's go back. This is how the game ended. After bishop d6, they just resigned. But let's take a look at this game fragment again. So nothing specific, and white doesn't know how to come up with a plan. White understands that there is a weakness on d6. However, at the moment, there is no possibility to exploit it. That's why white is looking of how to improve his pieces. And with the knight being on e3, white sees that f5 is a potentially a good spot for such a knight, and that would help to exploit that bad pawn structure. And in order to achieve it, he plays this move to provoke g5 and make f5 available for the knight to be able to attack two weak pawns simultaneously, and as well as many squares into the enemy territory. If f6, then there are weaknesses there. The bishop becomes terrible, and it's possible to continue with queen c3. If anything else like that, then black loses immediately. If rook d7, it's f4, and they lose at least a pawn or maybe even the knight. So white provoked black to make a weakness in his pawn structure, and allowed himself, I mean white, to move his knight to f5, and because of that achieve a significant material advantage. It's a significant positional advantage that he later converted to a material advantage. Fine, let's take a look at our second example. This time we are playing for black pieces. It was Emmanuel Lasker playing against Alexander Alekin. Well, wait. White has a bishop pair. Oh, black has a bishop pair, sorry. But they don't have space. But look at the pawn structure. So d4 is definitely a weakness. It's only protected by the knight. Well, here the pawns are doubled. It's not a tragedy, but the main disadvantage of that is that in case if the g pawn moves, f4 becomes a weakness. But if the g doesn't move, then this pawn at least moved from e3 and made d4 a weakness. So what do you think we should do to take advantage of the enemy weaknesses? Or how can we convert our bishop pair? And also, how do we have to deal with this problem? The pawn on c6 seems to be under attack. So I'm waiting for your answers.
So you're saying that if black takes on d4, white's going to take on c6.
No,
Is
I'm saying that there is a knight.
Oh, right,
defending.
right.
Okay, so it seems that everyone is yeah. Well, now when you in our previous example, when you saw that bishop h4 that provoked weaknesses, this time everyone suggests bishop h5. That's absolutely right. So once the knight moves, you take. If the knight doesn't move, you take the knight and win a pawn, attacking the rook. So they don't have time to capture on c6. So how to play? It seems, well, this means you take there with a tempo. So they don't have time to capture there because of the rook. So g4. But g4 makes the f4 pawn a weakness. Of course, the f4 as a pawn not is such a weakness because f5 can be played. But e5 makes this bishop worse and also make the f4 square weak and available for our pieces. So bishop goes back to f7, fine. So what's your suggestion? How do we decide to deal with this pawn? Do we sacrifice it, or you have any counterplay here, maybe?
What if I no, it's not gonna work.
Yes, it's rook c8. So it's actually quite common, especially in some variations of the exchange of variation of Slav defense, where something is captured on c6 and then rook c8 is played in order to win material back by taking advantage of the pin. Okay, because I was simultaneously reading the comment by Brian said that rook a3 creates more weaknesses. That's not true. It creates only one weakness, e3. Now this and this are not weaknesses. So you'd better not do this because it instead improves his pawn structure. So now what they have to do is to defend e3, which is actually easier task because they can defend it with multiple pieces. Okay, so, well, it's aside of that fact that the b7 is hanging. Definitely rook c8. They move their queen and b takes c6. Why the b? To make d5 stronger. But c6 is potential weakness. Well, doing knight g2 was better. This move was recommended for white, but instead they played f5. What do you think black should do? So there is no weak pawn on f4, but f4 is a weak square. The d4 is still a weak pawn. Peter, I don't think that bishop b5 in that position worked. So let me quickly show what Peter wanted. So b takes. How do you unpin? So queen d6, let's say. Rook c1 to support it. Okay, so at least I can play this move. So the rook is still poisoned. Well, of course, you can exchange your queen for two rooks, but I'm sure that you won't survive because of your king's weakness. Or maybe you, well, now this is hanging. So let's say king g2. Rook a6, at least. Queen a4, defending there. Oh, I still don't think that you can survive here. So what can I do is at least something like that. So, well, I didn't calculate this line before, but capturing on c6 with a bishop, it looks so suspicious. Maybe there is no immediate win of that bishop, but it definitely ties white pieces down to the defense of that bishop on c6. And even if black doesn't win a piece, at least they improve their pieces a lot and capture the other enemy pawn weaknesses. So that's why bishop b5 is definitely a move that makes your position weak. Queen d6, bishop c7 is a battery. Okay, so queen b2, b takes c6, f5, and queen d6 and bishop c7 is a battery. Yes, but the queen actually wants to go to f4 too, and that's why they have to defend this square with this move. Then yes, bishop c7. The rest is to get rid of this knight. Rook fe1 was played in the game, so nothing specific. If the rooks are exchanged there, we can still capture with a rook. This is protected. This is not hanging. And having the rook on the open file is a good idea for black. Let's decide. So how do we take advantage of this battery? How can we realize our original idea of queen h2, or maybe instead you have some other suggestions? Okay, so actually, guys, you are right. If only we combine your suggestions. So h5 first, and then knight h7, knight g5. So because h6 seems to be slow. If you play h6, and then knight h7, just one move h4 stops your knight g5 activity. But if you play h5, you may first threaten to take on f3 with your bishop in case if they exchange. So they have to react with h3. And then you continue with knight h7, knight g5. So this time h4 is no longer possible. So rook e8, rook e8, rook e1. Well, what do you think? Exchange or not to exchange?
That's the exchange. It always keeps pressure on.
So exchange and keep pressure on what? Like with knight g5. So if your exchange, they can capture with which? With, well, this knight, then you take all his material, well, pawns on that side, so with this pawn. This allows you to play queen f4. Let me see how it works. So h takes g4 first, h takes g4, and then, well, does knight g5 make sense in this position? Let's decide.
It
Well,
does.
it actually does make sense here while the pawn is alive. For example, take this, this, we have to take there, and now they don't have any ideas of how to defend the h3 pawn. But I'm still not sure that this is the best way to play. Maybe we can also try this strategy, queen f4. So they, well, there is no way to protect this pawn because something like that, well, I just don't have something like that is just a blunder. Queen b7 is a counterplay, but queen g4. Now the king moves, and well, one of the pawns is lost. Oh, bishop b6 at least. Bishop b6 is problematic because they first deliver a check and distract our knight. So then they take there. So I think black is better, but I'm not sure that this is a winning position. Okay, so let's decide if we can play better instead. Actually, I think black did play better. They decided to not exchange, but gain a temper and use this rook to use it. So they decided to use this rook in the future attack. For example, once queen h2 is played and the king escapes, it's possible to bring the rook and add pressure on the king. So that's why having this rook on the board only increases the black's attacking potential. Queen c1, knight g5, as we originally wanted. How should they play? They actually played knight e5 move, but let's see what else they can do. Because h3 is hanging, I don't think that they have this. You can just take once and with a check and then take on g4. So it doesn't work. Taking on g5 right away is possible, but then queen h2. King f1, take there. So if they take with a queen, you're threatening to win a knight. If they take on c6, well, here. Yeah, if they take on c6, here, because now this means that you lose a bishop on c7. Okay, so I muted everyone because there was some background noise. However, if you want to say anything, you can unmute and say it. So queen c6. Then you can win a tempo like that and then still threaten with this move. So even if they play rook e7, their attack is not decisive. While black simply has extra piece and rook b2 is coming. So there is nothing specific with this attack. Let me show you this. For example, king takes queen e6, king f8, so what, f6? I cannot play rook e8 because of this move. But wait a sec, I can still play that. I can still play rook b2. Rook b2. Yeah, queen d6 looks good here. Okay, fine. Okay, then first I play rook b2, right? First I play rook b2 and then I take on f7. So how? Bishop c2, let's say, then I take, and this time it's not a big issue. The king is able to escape to the other side of the board. Actually, maybe I don't have to take. Oh, when bishop is here, I can play this move. And if king d1, it's checkmate. If king f1, I just take on c2. There are okay, and there is a check, but then king f7. Yes, it's fine. So this attack is not decisive. That's why knight g5 loses. They play knight e5. It does make sense, but the problem is that h3 is hanging. So taking on h3 and then taking on e5 was quite attractive. In the game, it was f takes e5 right away, queen takes g5, and simply e4 with a strong attack. The bishop now has to move, and once the bishop moves, let's say here, we can win this knight. That's why in this position, they tried some counterplay with this. What would you suggest for black? Should we just capture, or can we play better? Well, but you have checkmate there. So if you try queen h2, king f1, and then what? How do you defend the g7? So this, and then a check with a rook. I don't think it works. Well, king e3 is a blunder, but king d1 looks okay. There is no this. So now there are two threats. Checkmate on g7 and the queen. So it doesn't make sense. Pawn takes bishop with a check. It makes a little more sense, but how do you continue your attack? You can take on h3, but then knight goes there, and still this is a problem. You have no more checks, so you cannot take on g4. There is a knight. You can try this, but then it's checkmate, so you lose. Actually, queen h2 is too optimistic. You have to defend your position first. And of course, you can pass the game to this endgame. You don't win material, but I mean, you don't win a minor piece, but you have an extra pawn, and that should be fine. Plus a bishop pair. So they move the bishop, you take on g4, and invade the enemy territory. It should be an easy win. But it's better just to play g6. This time, when the queen is in our camp, queen h6 doesn't make any sense. We just capture on f6. They can capture here, but it doesn't work well. Why? Well, this time there is no immediate mating threat, and we can simply continue with this original plan. So here, for example, take there, king takes, queen h3, knight blocks, and queen h5. And we have extra piece. That's why they played f4 to stop the queen activity. En passant was possible, but I think the plan was to block the activity of the queen and bishop with rook e5. That's why black decided to play this. Bishop moves. Otherwise, we would take the bishop. So the bishop moves, and g takes h3. Now what? If they play any move, it's queen f4. Well, the knight moves, it's queen f4, the exchange of the queen. So black is so many pawns up, so it's simply winning. But that's why bishop here. So how would you defend your position this time? Because they are threatening to take on g6. Just h takes g6 means this.
I'd move my king from G to H.
That does make sense. Let me see what white can do. What if they try to bring the rook? This is still not hanging because of that. And their next move is rook h3. So even if you decide to take, their next move is, no, this time actually this, and then rook h3. And white wins. So king h7 is a bit suspicious. Bishop d8, bishop d8 works, I agree. If bishop takes, then you can capture with a queen, bishop takes, king takes, and you're fine. But there is a more simple continuation. You can simply do this, and if they take there, then you take on g2 and win the queen. If they decide to play with a knight, what else they can do? Then take on f4 and exchange the queens. So they played knight h4, and this exchange of the queens happened. Now it's completely winning. So yeah, they can take on g6, but only once. If they take for the second time, there is rook g2, which allows to win the bishop. So this is how the game ended. Okay, let's go back to the very beginning and do a quick summary. The pawn structure was already bad. d4 was a very weak pawn, which was only defended by one knight, and tying enemy pieces to the defense of this pawn means spending a lot of resources. And there are also weaknesses on the light squares. There was a bishop that could potentially compensate, I mean, neutralize these weaknesses, could cover it with well, the bishop activity could cover this weakness, but the bishop is not on their best position, and that's why bishop h5 taking, well, advantage of that was a possible plan. That provoked g4, which makes f4 a weak pawn, and if the pawn moves, the f4 square becomes weak, as well as this diagonal becomes open, so we can take advantage of this diagonal and try to checkmate the enemy king. And based on this idea, we were able to succeed. So we built a battery, undermined pawns, and brought our knight to g5 that almost guaranteed a winning position. Let's continue. Well, let's take a look at this position. It's black to move. Black has a bishop pair, so they would love to keep it. Well, two knights occupy one square. So, I mean, there is a knight on f5, and this knight is really good. But there is the second knight, which doesn't have such good squares. So the only task of that knight is to support the other one. So knight g4 or knight c4 in this exact position make no sense. So bishop f8 to keep a bishop pair. Well, if it's a blitz game and you have to react rapidly, then bishop f8 is a good move. But let's take a look if we have better continuation. What about the enemy pawn structure? So it seems harmonical at the moment. So e4 is not a weakness, but even if we try to attack it, they always have f3. The pawns are connected to each other. So what do you think we can do to create weaknesses in the enemy camp and then take advantage of that? Is c2 a backward pawn? Well, no, it's not, because well, we can say that it's temporary backward pawn, but when people say the backward pawn, they usually means a backward pawn that cannot move further, but is located on a semi-open file. This time the C file is closed and the C pawn can move. So it's technically not such a pawn that you can take advantage of. It's not a weakness. It's not a backward pawn. So what do you think? Knight to f4. Well, knight to f4, yes, this makes sense because it forces the rook to move. Actually, I don't know where. Maybe to g2, actually. Knight to f4. Oh, wait a sec. No, knight to f4 doesn't look good because they take with a check. So queen takes, and then they play rook d2. You would continue with something like that. They would react with g3. No, g3 doesn't look good. Then knight h3, knight g5. Okay, so they can take with a check. Aha, they can take and they can play then queen e1 and exchange everything. The position of the knight looks good, but it looks like while the squares are covered, the knight is not really doing much. Yeah, knight f4 is good intermediate move. Let's have it in mind. Okay, so here Alan and John suggested to play bishop b4 to provoke c3. That's right. It makes weaknesses in the enemy queen side. Alan, can you please remind me what's your rating on chess.com is? So yeah, it does provoke c3. Can they not play c3 but play something else? Well, yes, they can. But knight f4 then traps the rook. So which other move they have to play to prevent it? g3. But g3 makes more weaknesses. And now knight g5 is a bit problematic. Even if they move the knight and create and defend this pawn, well, I'm not sure if we can take knight e4. If rook e4, then this. But they may try intermediate knight h6. Pawn takes, rook takes there, and h6 is vulnerable. So it's extra pawn, but it's under attack. That's why maybe we'd better take there, pawn takes, and then consider like queen c8 or e4 and knight f3. Actually, we can play knight f3 right away if we want. Or maybe I like queen d7, so adding pressure on this pawn. Fine, but yeah, c3 is a must. This should be provoked. When c3 was played, there are weaknesses on e2 and d3. And of course, we start with this. If they take our bishop, there is a fork. That's why they have to move their rook. Moving the rook there means they fall under another fork. So rook d2. Please suggest what you should do in this position. Well, knight d3 looks attractive, but Michael, let's calculate it. Knight d3, they sacrifice, rook takes, and then you lose a bishop. So it seems that you lose two minor pieces for a rook, which doesn't favor you. But let's see if you can have some advantage. Maybe you can capture the pawn on b3. Not sure. Well, let's make these moves on the board. So knight d3 take, this. There is queen c4 check, but then it's queen f7. Wait a sec, there is knight d5 also. And once the queen moves, it's knight e7. So rook and pawn are not as good as two minor pieces. Also, there is knight f6 and queen h6 ideas. Fine, so knight d3, no, seems quite suspicious. Bishop c5, probably. Bishop f8, I would say yes, because it also threatens with g6 and makes h6 unavailable for the enemy knight. Well, I will play bishop f8 probably, but black chose a more practical decision. They took on f5. I'm not a fan of exchanging bishops for the knights, but if there is a way to take advantage after that, then this exchange is playable. So knight f8 was played, knight f5, I mean, and now the bishop escapes. Well, can they take there? Yes, they can, but then there is a hole on e2. So knight f5, and taking this bishop makes no sense because e4 pawn is lost. And if you then, let's say, try to exchange, and then you think that there is a check, no, it doesn't work because bishop d5. Knight f5, bishop f8. Did we go over bishop e6? Well, we cannot go over bishop e6 because our bishop on b4 is hanging. So that's why we have to either move the bishop or make such a move which creates a threat and doesn't allow them to take our bishop, such as bishop f5 or rook takes d2. Well, when we capture a piece and threaten something else, they definitely cannot capture our bishop on b4. So bishop f5, knight takes, and now we'd better retreat, but bishop c5 was played in the game. It wasn't the best way. What can you say about this position, and what can you suggest for white here? White has to guard the d3 weakness, true. So yeah, they can play b4, and in my opinion, b4 favors the white's position more. But you may also consider that this bishop is bad, and okay, so actually, no, you guys want to activate pieces first, and well, because I thought that probably bishop a3 deserves attention, because if they can exchange our bishop for the enemy bishop, it looks fine for white. But bishop a3 doesn't look like a good plan, so we can play this, and what would you suggest here? How black can increase their advantage and maybe convert such an advantage to extra pawn? Well, rook d8 and queen b6. So let's say rook d8, queen goes to c2 or b2. No, c2 maybe. c2, let's say. And then queen b6. But then I exchange the bishops. I still think that there is a lot of advantage for black, but I would start with bishop a3 move. It makes the enemy rook passive for a while, as well as the object of the attack. So rook d8, queen moves, and queen d7. What does this move do?
So
First
that's
of all, with
so that's
threaten.
why white shouldn't have played bishop to a3.
That's right. That's not a good move, but it's definitely a move to consider, because strategically exchanging this bishop for this bishop favors white. However, it seems that they just don't have enough tempi because of the weakness of the back rank. Queen c2, queen d7, threatening mate. So they have to either play h3, which doesn't make much sense because you can still invade the enemy camp, or bring the rook back. But if so, it's queen d3, and they lose one of these two pawns. How do they lose these pawns? So first of all, the queen exchange is a must, because, well, it's knight e2, knight takes e3, for example, next. If rook c1, you take the queen, and the back rank is still weak. So they have to take, rook takes. This is problematic. There is no tactics. And this already means you can play knight e2. c4 means you take on b3. So black wins a pawn and successfully realizes his extra pawn in the endgame.
Could white have played knight e3 defending the queen rather than exchanging there?
But the c3 pawn is still a weakness. So, for example, it's actually a big problem, because then this, and if they play king h1, We can take on c3 right away. Or, yeah, well, I don't know what is better. Let's take right away. So it doesn't work. Well, I also think that this deserves much attention because 93, it's 92, knight takes c3 anyway. And there is no possibility of defending the knight. Fine. So bishop a3 doesn't work. b4 works. This is how they played. Bishop f8, rook d8, rook takes d8. This is a problem. So queen c2. Black plays queen d7. I'm sure you understand why. Okay, so can you please, I want to make sure that everyone understands. Can you please specify why queen d7 is a good move and what this move aim for? It allows the queen's invasion, so either to d2 or d3, as well as it weakens the back rank. So what would you suggest for white in this position? King of 1. So unfortunately, such a move didn't come to my mind. King of 1. So, well, okay, queen d3 seems to be okay, but queen d2 may be a problem. Now, well, defending isn't a good strategy. So take, and then you lose material. So it's possible to play like that, but then it's knight d3, and even king e1 is impossible, illegal. So the rook moves, and one of these pieces is lost. So defending doesn't make sense. Capturing, because what else? It's likely to be queen e2 next. So capturing makes a lot of sense. Then this. Now bishop c1 means checkmate with rook d1. So how to play? Defend. Well, bishop a3 is the other option, but bishop a3, I can probably play knight d3 and win this pawn. F3, let's say, to save it. Well, just a simple win of the pawn on c3 then. Yes, but let me deliver a check first, and then I'll play like that. So I want to keep the king further from the center. Rook d1 in which position? Okay, instead of king of 1. No, it wasn't possible. I'll show you a little later. So looks like king of 1 doesn't look good. And then it's again a double attack. So rook d1 is not playable. Black simply captures it. I guess they control the 7. Okay, fine. Is it slow enough so you can understand all these ideas that I'm illustrating, or you think that I should decrease the pace of explanation? Okay, thanks. So what I think should be done is g3. Why? First of all, it creates an escape square. Yes, thanks, Alan. Second, it chases the knight away. So, well, doing queen d3 is a blunder. Check, and then the knight is lost. Doing knight d3 makes no sense, and it's hard to unpin them. Doing knight h3 makes some sense, but after king g2, how to proceed? Knight g5. That's why instead, after g3, black would have to react with g6, after which white is forced to take. This time, doing knight e3 is a mistake, because knight h3 looks stronger. For example, king goes there or king goes there, it is knight g5, threatening with this and this. So that's why take, 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 and then exchange the queens. Rook d1, and this is likely to be a drawing position. So actually, this is how white could save the game. Why? How do they unpin? Actually, well, they can always unpin with this move. And bishop h6 never works because of bishop b2. So yeah, you can still play that, but bishop b2, and what you can do next is just to attack once again. But they will repeat. This is a pin. Well, this is actually a skewer, and you have to pin them to not let them to take. But once it happens, it's again bishop b2 and the repetition. So probably instead of doing bishop h6, you can continue with this. And I'm sure you can win this pawn, but not immediately. Because if you try it immediately, then bishop g5 and the discovered attack. So this is where white would probably have some chances to not lose the game. However, g3 requires calculations. And after g6, it is a must to take on f4. But they played rook f1, and that was the most critical mistake, after which black converted their advantage. So now, having the d file, having our knight into the attack, allows us to invade the enemy camp. Queen d3. With queen d3, we are also, well, queen d2 looks good too, but queen d3 is stronger because from d3 we threaten this rook. How do we threaten this rook? So definitely if they take, they are likely to lose this pawn because knight e2, knight takes c3. If they decide to maybe play knight g3, defending there, then with c5, we can bring more pieces to the attack and still succeed. So c4, and well, c takes b4. So let's say b5, c4, we close the bishop. The bishop is tied down to this weakness. Then bishop here, and then rook there. And even knight d3 later. So they didn't take. In this position, they continued with queen b3. So queen b3, the king has to move. And if, let's say, in this position, they tried to invade our camp, we had a very simple tactical strike. Queen f1, king f1, and checkmate with a rook. That's why probably they had to play something else. For example, well, what if they just did b5? How would you continue then? Advance the pawn to c4. Yes, you can, but there is a more simple way to win material right away. 92. Okay, the purpose of b4 was to gain time to eventually play. Well, I'm reading the Peter's comment. Why didn't have a chance? Yeah, the purpose of b4 was to chase the bishop away, grab some space, and yeah, potentially open the other bishop. But not okay. So it's 92. However, after king h1, it's not knight g3 because knight g3, and the rook is protected. It's knight c3. You win one pawn, and then the second one. So even if they play rook e1, you can still do that. And if the queens are exchanged, the knight is still poisoned. So that's why playing it slowly here makes no sense. And they played knight g3 to control e2 and also to protect this rook. c5, bringing more pieces to the game with the idea of c4, makes a lot of sense. So what else? to play. C5, what other move you can suggest in this position? H5, right. So both moves are quite strong. H5 threatening with H4. Well, if they play H4, then we would continue with C5. Threatening to take and take advantage of the pin. If they play this move, then C4, and where do they move their queen? So not here, not there, not there, not there. So queen A2, and then just bishop C5, threatening to take. So bishop C1 was played instead. H4, bishop takes there. Pawn takes, the knight has to move, it goes back. And now you no longer have this super knight, which could create some threats and could allow you to win the pawn on c3, but you have two pawns and you can expose the enemy king. This is what black does with their next move, h3. How did it work? Well, how to play? Well, knight h4 is probably the best move, but after queen e4, I don't think that we should discuss this position. Black is a pawn up. Well, it's a huge advantage, full domination. This king is not so weak, so even if queen f7 is played, it's h takes g2. Then f3, so queen g4 is a threat. The knight goes there, but then it's queen f5. It's already one extra pawn. c3 is hanging, queen g5 is coming. That's why they played queen e6, but even queen e6 doesn't make sense. H takes g2. So maybe you have a question, why not to play something like that, for example? Well, if this move, then you can take on e4. Knight h4, that was a pawn loss, and you can just slowly continue your pressure, maybe by doing this move and threatening with a mate. Because I don't think that queen f7 allows to do a perpetual check. So if such a move, I think we can still take, and after queen f6, just simply move the queen to avoid future checks like that. Because actually, no, like that. Yeah, like that. Because if they take, it's checkmate. If they deliver another check, we don't block with a bishop because we don't want to lose our rook with a check. So king f7. Queen goes there, but we are up a piece. So queen e6 was played, h takes g2, king takes g2, f3, and then it's over. Why? If king g3, they lose a rook, and we are threatening with queen g2, and they don't have a counterplay. If they play king g1, it's a simple mate that I'm sure you already learned. Queen f1. King takes f1 and rook d1 mate. So yeah, this is how the game ended. Actually, I'm not sure that white played again. That it ended with a checkmate. I think it's earlier white resigned. Anyway, so let's do a quick summary of what happened. So black had a bishop pair and wanted to keep their dark squared bishop. So that's why they played this, because most likely this move provokes c3. Because if not, knight f4 traps the rook, and playing g3 means to weaken certain squares into the white's camp, which is even more which creates more weaknesses that black can potentially exploit. That's why c3. c3 made the weakness of the d3 square and allowed us to invade the enemy territory. So the whole concept was based on the weakness of d3 and the ability of our pieces to invade there, threaten the queen exchange, threaten c3 and b3 pawns, as well as a pawn on e4. So this exchange on f5 was a bit suspicious. I would just play this, keeping a bishop pair and hoping to convert this bishop pair later in the game. b4, what else? Because then it's a threat of knight d3. So b4 chases this bishop away. And then the black was able to double and invade the d3 square. So that was the biggest problem. They could avoid it if they found the only move g3, but they didn't. And because of that, it was possible to play either queen d3 or queen d2. Queen d3 is stronger. Why? Because we threatened the pawn on c3, which is very hard to protect.
How about
And
after, sorry,
uh-huh.
how about after b4, the bishop retreats, playing c4 right away and not exchanging? I mean, it's very quick.
Oh, you lose a pawn on b4 right away?
Uh, so do you have time to play, maybe defend it?
So I can explain the reason why such a move, bishop f5, was played in the game. Because Alan has some ideas. Well, this move was played to speed up development, to bring the rook to the game and exchange the bishop, which by the first glance looks passive. However, again, it's not the best thing. So it was, well, because white would defend in such a case with their g3 strategy, that would almost equalize the position. Instead, it could make sense to try to keep a bishop pair and realize and convert this bishop pair advantage later in the game. Fine. So, and then this invasion to d3 happened, and that provided us with decisive advantage and could allow us to win a pawn on c3 or succeed with the attack on the king side. Also, rook f1 was an accuracy. Fine. We have one more game that I prepared for today. Well, the game between Boris Gelfand, actually JC Gdansky and Boris Gelfand. However, before we proceed with this game, let me share the screen again. So if you like my webinars, you can donate. Well, these workshops and webinars are free. However, if you like them, if you want to support, you can always donate using this button. Let me paste it to the chat and explain how it works. So well, unfortunately, it's only possible to donate if you have a PayPal account. So you click the button and new pop-up window appears. You enter the amount you want to donate. It can be any amount. Then you click the PayPal button again, enter your PayPal account and transfer money automatically to my PayPal account. I would really appreciate any support. Also, the other way to support is to go directly to my website and purchase one of my courses if you find them interesting. So it's Tricks of Chess. Again, let me copy it to the chat. If you don't know, well, there is actually 10 tips for self-studying chess. You can download it too. As for courses, the courses are here. And what I was telling about in the very beginning was this planning guide that allows you to react, that allows you to understand what you should be doing depending on the pawn structure. So I analyze different types of the pawn structure and explain what common plans for white and black there are. So knowing that will help you to increase your performance in similar situations. So for example, if you actually play Caro-Kann, Slav, or like Najdorf, you have to learn these pawn structures and what typical plans there are. Well, there are other courses. If you want, you can look at them and decide maybe you need some of them. Also, there is a training program. If you want to study chess yourself, you can purchase a 3 months training program. Well, what is it? I am explaining. I'm creating a list of tasks for you that you have to do week by week to become a better player. All is based on your games analysis. I analyze your games and tell you what mistakes you should work on and provide you with material that you can work on your own. Fine. And finally, we have a Chesslands Club on chess.com. So let me copy the link for you to join. Oops. Okay, so how? Okay, so I cannot. I think the link is like that. Join. I think this is the link. So what are we doing there? Well, of course, I'm publishing my so these announcements about the webinars. There is also my micro lessons that you can probably interested in, and well, many more. We are going, well, this upcoming week I'm going to organize a tournament where the task is to play Can Sicilian. So all games start with Can Sicilian opening. So I'm going to conduct it every week, a certain opening, so you can practice it. The first will be Can Sicilian. Fine. Let's continue. We have still one more game to talk, and then I'll do a quick summary.
Did you see my question, or you haven't finalized the plan yet?
Okay. So yeah, good point. Yes. Sorry, guys. Well, I forgot to share. Let me share it right away. Yes, I created a plan, and I'm going to announce a new course of group lessons. This group course is called How to Attack and Defend in Chess. So there will be 8 lessons. They will be conducted on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And these are these lessons. Each lesson is 90 minutes. There are usually 6-7 people during the class. Some just watch the recording and do the homework. But, well, so usually there are maybe 10 students in a group, and 5, 6, or 7 attended in live. Others watch the recording. So this is what we are going to talk about. So first of all, preconditions of the attack. When you what tells you that you may start an attack on the enemy king? Then how to attack the king in the center, how to attack the king on the king side, and how to attack the king when you are castle to the opposite side. We already covered at our previous course of group lessons, so we can partially talk about it, but I don't think that we should spend more time on it. Instead, we will learn how to attack the king in the center, how to attack the king with pawns, how to attack the king with minor and major pieces, and also we are going to talk about typical attacking and defensive techniques. And in terms of defense, there will be 3 lessons of 8, which will be devoted only to how to defend the position, and 3 most common ways of doing it. So how to initiate a counterattack when your king is under attack, how to make a breakthrough in the center, and how to exchange enemy pieces to decrease his attacking potential. When are we going to start? Not sure yet. I think in 2 weeks. Fine. If you have any questions, you can always message me. You can email me. I'll tell. Okay, let's continue with the analysis of the last game, and then do a summary. Okay, please take a look at this position and tell me what you think black should do. So the knight is hanging, so we cannot take the enemy knight. There is also a queen behind. But, well, we have this pawn, so bringing the knight to d3 makes a lot of sense. Not sure if you should play this move right away, but definitely it's possible. It would work perfectly well if your rook was on e8. Well, knight d3 is the move that deserves attention, and I would consider it to play first. However, yeah, so play with the hanging. However, black started with this move. Why this is a good idea? So why we may not save the knight right away, but deliver this check. So the idea of this check is to provoke g3, which makes light squares weak in the enemy camp. Now, well, Alan, not bishop d8, but bishop f6. And you have time to save your knight. And even do knight d3. Well, but let's talk about other moves. They definitely do not want to make a king move. This loses castling privilege. So that's why the only other candidate move is to bring the bishop to f2. In such a case, if you exchange, it seems to be okay for white. That's why here, black may find a tactical strike. Here you may tell me, like, Victor, what you are doing. So your bishop is hanging, your knight is hanging, you give up a pawn and they can capture it with a check, right? But by doing king f8, you actually create a threat of rook e8, which is greater than these two threats. That's why they have to secure their king first. Maybe like that, maybe by moving the queen, but castling is usually better. Rook e8 anyway. The queen moves. The queen moves to that position from which it can protect the bishop. So any of these moves. But then we still take the bishop. The queen moves once again. And our knight is not hanging this time. So we can play queen b6, threatening a discovered attack, as well as just threatening to take the pawn on b4. So queen b2. So still it's not hanging. Bishop g4. And now they don't know where to move the rook. Most likely they have to... Well, moving the rook up means that we invade the enemy camp, and this is a disaster. I think they have to play something like that and sacrifice exchange. Like that. So that's why playing bishop f2 was a mistake, actually, and g3 is the best move, but then bishop f6. Now the rook moves, and finally we can initiate our original idea with bishop d3. Well, it's a fork, but even if it's not, having the knight on d3 and moving the king is a bad idea. So it slows down the white's development, it opens the e file and makes the king more vulnerable. I mean, it doesn't open the e-file, but makes the king more vulnerable, because if the king goes there, we can still check him using the light squares. And for example, this is actually checkmate. So they have to go there, and even if the rook is not hanging, the king is still in the trouble. So that's why they take. We take with a pawn, the e-file is open, and of course, white tries to create some counterplay. Rook e1, rook e8. So light squares are weakened, and we have a light squared bishop. So, for example, bringing there and having the queen somewhere on f3 or on h3 means that the game is almost over. But white has space there, and white has two pawns that they can convert to a pass pawn. And this is what they're trying to exploit. So c5. Well, this and this becomes kind of a threat. Not actually, not sure about that. But black decided to take. Taking with the b pawn, in my opinion, makes more sense. The pawns are stronger. It's queen d7, but then it's c6, threatening there. Pawn takes, queen c7. The queen has to block, but the position is more open, and maybe white gets more chances. However, it seems that it's hard to suggest a move, because this queen is supporting the knight is supporting the pawn, the rook can move, yes, but what it allows white to do, and there is always a tactical strike with something like that to add pressure on e3 and take advantage of the pin. So white has to keep an eye on multiple threats at the same time, and that's why they have to play accurately. So I would still capture with the b pawn, but white decided to take with the c5, on c5 with a rook to gain a tempo. The queen moves to a light square, going there then, and knight c4. So threatening with a fork, rook d8 to avoid it, and d6. Well, again, maybe doing something like that was better. Queen d6, knight goes back, and this time the queen from b8 can hardly move to h3. But they play d6, after which bishop a4, and the queen goes to h3 directly. So what would you suggest for white in this position? Because let's say the queen comes there and then bishop c3, it's game over. Queen g4, queen f3 also looks dangerous. Yeah, queen f2 defends against this, but queen f2 allows us to play this move right away. Okay, let me decide. So bishop b4, or let's first try this, where this knight goes. Ah, the knight goes and I take the pawn just. So, right, it looks a bit problematic. What they did do, well, decided to take a crucial decision. So it drastically changed the game. Queen h3, threatening mate, and the sacrifice. Well, actually, this sacrifice is reasonable because otherwise it's just a strong positional grip. So they sacrifice the exchange for a pawn as a compensation. Well, actually, there was no full compensation because rook f4, winning a pawn back based on this pin. Doing something like that would make some sense, but if let's say, well, they play this move, but if let's say they play this move, what would you suggest for black? Yeah, rook f2, right. It's rook f2. Rook f2, king f2, queen h2. So if they block, there is bishop d4, at least. If they move the king further, it's bishop c3, and with such a king, well, they are pawned down, but also with such a king, they are in a danger. So they cannot move the rook because of queen h1. They cannot take on b7, still because of queen h1. And, well, black is simply winning.
Could he play queen h1 directly rather than bishop c3?
What's the purpose? To exchange the queens, because when the rook is here, it's protected.
Oh, yeah, okay, okay.
So queen g4. Queen g4 when? No. Well, in this position, Johnny suggested queen g4. It's not as good as rook f2. I think so. But queen g4 attacks the knight, but the knight moves there and covers this square too. So I think it's better to sacrifice, take there, and then try to take advantage of the king's weakness. So d7 was worse. What would you suggest? So I don't think that this pawn bothers us because we have d8 protected. So even if he plays rook c8, it doesn't create any threat because then there is still a bishop. So what do you think how to play? So bishop d4. Yeah, he can just take the bishop. Yes, I see that. Rook h4. Yeah, so you're still taking advantage of this pin. And now it's over. So they played rook c8. Again, it's not a threat, so queen h2. Well, the idea is that once you take, which looks attractive too, because you can still capture that new queen, but this time you lose a rook. And white is actually better. Maybe not winning, but much better. So you can just ignore it, take on h2. King f1, queen h3 check to maintain a pin. The king moves, queen e6, and well, you cannot take on c4, but you can just save your rook, and this is not a threat. Bishop b6. Well, bishop b6 is a blunder. If such a move is played, you can just take on c8 simply and take there. That's why actually after rook h5 they played knight b6, protecting both d7 and c8. But this is also a blunder. And what would you suggest for black? Rook f5. Thanks, Georgios. It's rook f5 to capture on f2. So king g2, rook f2, king takes, and queen b6. That's why after rook f5, he simply resigned. Well, this is a position with extra piece. So what I want you to remember from this game. So, well, bishop h4 was played to provoke a weakness on the light squares, because later black assumed exchanging their knight for that bishop. That's why there will be no opponent for the bishop on f5. And if the bishop comes to e4, it's a real problem. So at least they should have the knight somewhere covering this square. I don't know where, maybe on f2 or on c3 at the very least. So that's why by forcing the enemy pawn moves, we create weaknesses. It can be either weak pawns or weak squares, like we did multiple times. For example, if you remember, in this game, we forced this pawn to move and made f4 a weak square. This time, there is a complex of squares weakened, and they don't have pieces to cover these weaknesses, which means that what we need to do is just to improve our pieces activity and coordinate our pieces and invading the enemy camp using weak squares. So basically, when we create a weakness in the enemy pawn, it's either, when we create a weakness in the enemy camp, it's either a weak pawn or a weak square. And if it's a weak pawn, we are targeting it, trying to capture it. If it's a weak square, then we are trying to put our pieces there, and we consider that by locating our piece there, we improve this piece a lot and obtain new opportunities. That's the reason. So having the bishop on e4 attacks the whole diagonal, especially if it's near the king. And you may say that, well, they probably don't need to castle. They may keep the king on f2, but the king on f2 still means that these two are weaknesses, and having our queen here or there allows us to succeed. So please pay attention to such situation when you provoke the enemy pawns to move, because you can exploit weaknesses that these pawns create. Or you can make the pawn structure, the enemy pawn structure weak and take advantage of that too, like it did, for example, in the first game that we analyzed today. So here we improved the knight, but then took advantage of these two weaknesses, h6 and d6, as well as took advantage of the enemy king, which was exposed after f6 move. Fine, so we are done for today. I'm sure you enjoyed the webinar. Well, you're welcome to suggest the topics for your webinars. If you have any questions regarding our next webinars and workshops, as well as tournaments that I'm going to conduct or group lessons, you can message me at tricksofchess@gmail.com. The email is here in the chat. So thank you all. And well, of course, thank you for coming. If you like the webinars, you can also share them with your friends and invite new participants to our next class that is going to take place next Sunday, same time. So remember that we start using American time, because most of our students are from the North America, either United States or Canada. So that's why for Europeans, these classes will start 1 hour earlier than usual. However, when Europe changes their time zone to the summertime, then it will start at our ordinary time. Fine. So thank you and hope to see everyone next Sunday. Bye-bye.